Very much for coming. I guess we all know why we're here, but free food and free beer.
Good beer.
Right, good free beer. But just a few details. This is the first pair of Vandersteen Kentos in the wild, and we're super proud of that. And we've been spending the day. Well, we spent the week breaking them in, but we've been spending the day. I was here yesterday, kind of doing my preliminary dial-in, and then today we did the final touches, and they're sounding spectacular. And we're driving them, of course, with the M5 HPA amplifiers, which we've had since last spring, but we now really get to finally hear what they can do. And we have also, for the first time, Brad O'Toole with us.
Hey guys.
Hey, Brad.
And then somebody, oh yeah, Richard Vandersteen.
Who's that guy? What glue does he use?
So Richard's going to say a few words and probably take some questions. And then he's going to head back upstairs and have some more beer while we play some music down here. So what we'll do after the conclusion of the speaking part is those people who have captured seats over there will probably be in the first group of listeners. And then after a period of time, they'll switch out and the next group can come in. And however long that goes, it goes.
Thank you, John. Yeah, after 40 years, I decided I didn't know how to sell our stuff anymore, so had to get a sales guy to help me out. Wife wants to travel in the motorhome a little more, and I'm too busy doing R&D, so it's a great addition to Vandersteen Audio, a whole different impact. Anyway, thanks. Like usual, John gets a really nice, friendly, big crowd here, and thanks for coming. It's good to be here again. And I'll talk a little bit about the new Kento. Be thinking of questions you might have that are of general interest. If you have questions that are specific to your own systems, we'll do that over a beer upstairs so that we can get into listening here. The Kentos have our Pistonic. Those of you who were here, how many people were here last time? Okay. How many people have seen the video on the website about cone breakup? What happens? Okay, those of you that haven't seen that, it's a lot of fun to watch that. It'll show you what happens with most cones when the Pistonic simply means that the entire diaphragm of the woofer, the tweeter, the mid-range is moving in exact unison with the voice coil that's being driven by the amplifier. Most drivers, we're the only ones that are Pistonic to the point to where you can use first order filters. Most drivers at some frequency turn to absolute chaos, and even at some frequencies, a third to a half of the cone will be going in the opposite direction of the voice coil. That creates a lot of time smear and a lot of additional distortion. And we're working at, in our structures and everything we do, Audio Quest in wires is trying to lower the noise floor, get rid of the distortions. Their power products do that. Their new wires under Garth's work is working at doing that in wires. Brad also represents HRS that makes the rack that we're using over here. That's all about getting the noise out of your gear so that you can hear what's really happening in the system. Many, many people say, man, I wish the power in my area was better because at night my system just sounds wonderful. During the day it's bad, I have bad power. We live in a 24/7 society. There is no difference in the power at night than in the daytime. So why does our system sound so much better at night? Because the kids are in bed, there's not as much traffic on the road, and you've lowered the noise floor in your room, sometimes 15 to 20 dB. So you've increased the signal to noise of your system 15 to 20 dB. That's a big deal. So getting the noise, that's kind of anecdotal evidence that getting the noise out of the system is a big deal. If we can do that at all, 24/7, we're ahead of the game. The The new Kentos here are replacements for the Model 5, which we made for over 20 years. Fantastic product. We discontinued it because its look was getting dated. So, and it was also getting too expensive to manufacture. So Nathan and I took another look at that price category. And what we have here is the carbon tweeter out of the 5A, the mid-range out of the Model 7 Mark II. The mid-bass driver is the same as the Quattro. And we've sourced from ScanSpeak, built to my specs, some new aluminum cone, anodized aluminum cone, 9-inch subwoofers, and their side firing. In order to get more dynamics and lower distortion out of the same driver that we use in the Quattro, because it is pistonic at the frequencies we use it, but to make it more dynamic and able to handle more power, and physically there was no room on that narrow baffle for a larger driver, we moved the high pass from 100 hertz up to 200 hertz. I knew this was happening, and that's why the M5 has a switch on it that had a 200 hertz setting. That's because I knew this was happening. The M5 amplifier was actually designed to drive this speaker. This is what I had in mind at the time we did the M5, which is the same technology that's in our liquid-cooled M7s, but done at a lower price point, half power and air-cooled instead of liquid-cooled. It turned out great. The advantage of moving that high pass up was some of the people, the reviewers in particular, that reviewed the Quattro complained about there being dryness in the lower mid-range upper bass. The owner's manual says very clearly, do not put these things 8 foot into a room, which the reviewer did. And when you do that, I deliberately overdamped the mid-bass driver in the Quattro because it was an aesthetic solution so that that speaker would work and sound great closer to the room boundaries. If you pull that thing way out into the room, it does get lean. By moving the high pass up to 200 hertz and taking the top 3 pots in the room EQ section and moving those up to 200 hertz, it gives the dealer who's doing the setup, if a person does want them out into the room for it, whatever reason they want to do that, you can warm that region back up. Simply said, that's the reason we did it. Moving that crossover point up an octave also gives that driver more headroom and is able to handle more power and produce more energy. That in a nutshell is what Nathan and I have been up to at Vandersteen Audio. All 4 of our children work at the factory. Some of you may have spoke to Jacqueline. That's our oldest daughter. She's the one that does the office work. Katie, our younger daughter, she's the one that builds all of the amplifiers and the crossovers into sophisticated products, the 5s, now the Kentos, the 7s, and all of the amps. Jeff is responsible for all the finish work, and Nathan is the one that helps me with R&D and does all of the anechoic work. Every pair of speakers we make gets the crossover dialed into that set of drivers in an anechoic chamber, every single one. So, with Brad's help, and the kids are taking on more, I could take my wife. I don't intend to, I'm almost 70, not in a mood to retire. I still love what I do as much as the day I started, but Mama wants to go play a little bit. So we're doing that. So any questions?
So Jonathan said that this is the first pair in the wild.
This is the first pair.
Do you have any plans on domesticating them?
Who, John or the speakers?
Let's ask MJ.
Anyway, yeah, what we're waiting on now is production quantities of the drivers that are unique, mostly the subwoofer drivers, the aluminum 9-inchers. They come from ScanSpeak. They're on order. They are going to deliver them sometime in December. In the meantime, we are building the structures and everything. We've got lots of orders. We're getting the finishes. They are $37.5 a pair, And that's in any wood veneer you want except ebony. You'll have to call and see if we can do that for the price. But any of our wood veneers or automotive paint, it's the same price. So friends of mine that know a lot about this industry told me, why are you even showing a wood one on the website? Nobody's going to want wood. And actually about 80% of orders have been wood. And I think that's partly because when you get into that price point, most of the speakers available are automotive paint, and people have been starved of the ability to get wood. I know that because I'm on the phone dealing with people who want to buy a pair of 7s and they want them in wood, and because they're carbon fiber structures, we can't put wood on them because the expansion rate of the carbon fiber in the wood is so different that it would eventually blow the veneer off and get cracks in it and everything, and then we have a warranty problem. It probably would last 5 years, get beyond the warranty, but I'd still be obligated. I just don't want to do that, okay? So, yes?
Are those special stands?
No, those are part of the speaker. That's not removable.
Oh,
They weigh 170 pounds.
so they are special, except they're attached.
Right.
Yeah. They're made out of HDF. If you've seen the picture of the Model 7s that have the granite bedrock plinth on them, that was such a dramatic improvement. And we just decided to implement that into here. There is an insert that's that extreme epoxy board that has, that's what the threads are tapped into and everything, but it won't come off. There are 4 screws, but if you get a pair, don't try to remove them because it's glued on. Those screws were there just to hold them till the glue dried. It's to help assembly.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, the linearity you mentioned earlier between the voice coil and the driver,
Mm-hmm.
is that a function of stiffness?
Yes, it's 100% a function of stiffness. The art is to get it stiff enough to remain like a pure piston. The reason there's a balsa core in there is things that stiff tend to ring like dinner bells, like calling the cows home. And the balsa is the web of the truss that gives us the stiffness, but it also damps. Every material has a characteristic sound. Carbon fiber happens to be lower than diamond, beryllium, polypropylene, paper. It is the lowest characteristics, the characteristic sound of carbon is the lowest I've ever measured, but it still has some sound. Putting the balsa in there functions as the trusses or the members in the truss, the webs, but it also damps what little character the carbon has out, to where it's the most neutral thing that I've ever listened to or measured. And that's why more and more of our products, I've been really, really working on getting that carbon technology into lesser and less, lower and lower prices into our products. So right now the VLR CT has that technology in it, the Trio CT, the Quattro CT, the Kentos, and the Model 7s. Good question. Boy, this group has gotten a lot easier than it used to be, John.
Wait, you're not out of the woods yet.
Blindside.
Yes.
From the time you decided I'm going to replace the 5As to serial number 1000 and 1001, what was the time? What was the time to get those up the door?
That was about a year. But remember, everything we make to date, everything, all of our products, are based on the R&D and all the live verses that we did back in 75, 76 on the original Model 2. The whole 1 driver per frequency range, because we don't want drivers smearing each other. The whole minimum baffle. If you take the poles off of an old pair of Model 2s, what you'll see inside is very narrow baffles, nothing around the drivers, and having the voice coil staggered. The driver technology and everything is used in a lot of our products. So there's really nothing new in it. It's bringing the technology of the Model 7s down lower, as low as we can. So designing a new product like that took a year, but there wasn't as much redesign as, like the mid-range comes out of the 7. The tweeter came out of the 5A carbon and is also what we use in the CT, the CT version. So, but Nathan, my son, did most of that. I was looking over his shoulder, of course, but Nathan did most of that. He does all the anechoic chamber work. So there's a future at Vandersteen Audio, even when they plant me. Yes.
Why did you decide to make your own amplifier?
When we finished the 7, I had some people say, how are you going to make a better loudspeaker? And the distortion was so low, it was truly pistonic. It was time and phase correct. But everything in an amplifier that a manufacturer has to do to sell a full range amplifier to control woofers, parallel output devices, emitter resistors, multiple tubes, feedback. I don't want to bore you with all the things. Severely compromises the mids and the highs. I said, wait a minute. I have powered subwoofers in all of our big products. I'm going to design an amplifier that's optimized for mids and highs that doesn't have to deal with all of the parallel devices and emitter resistors. So we got the circuit down to 5 parts. There's 500 parts in these amps, but only 5 of them are in the signal path. And I did that to optimize an amp to be able to do mids and highs with a whole lot less time smear. Because believe it or not, there's time smear in amplifiers. You can put 20 power devices, power output transistors in a row using an emitter resistor so that they'll share, but they're never really an exact copy of one another. And they tend to smear each other, and it's not necessary for the mids and the highs, only woofers. In this case, our amplifiers will not drive woofers. They're not designed to do that. It's not worth another manufacturer to make that because they need to universally work on everybody's loudspeaker. In my case, I didn't need that. That's a good question. So it's a very unique circuit. It's never been done. It's 2 single-ended amplifiers which have exactly the same parts on pin 2 and pin 3, if you know what balanced means, the positive and the negative phase. And then those 2 amplifiers are connected together through the loudspeaker. So you have an amp, and then the speaker in between them. So it can't pull because there's no P channel. Or it's not like an output transformer on a tube amp where one side pulls and the other side pushes. This is push-push because it can't pull. So you eliminate crossover distortion. Yes?
So is that, are both sides of the balance, are they Class A?
No, you don't need it. Class A is to try to minimize crossover distortion. We don't have any. So we run a moderate amount of bias to keep the output devices warm so they'll sound better, but we don't need it to lower distortion or minimize crossover distortion. Yeah. Yes.
When you were here presenting the 7s several years ago, you had mentioned how long it takes to create the balsa wood drivers. Have you improved that process?
No.
You have more
It's
people doing
still, I still do all of them.
Really?
I have a person who is good at doing the tweeters for the CT versions, but the carbon fiber balsa tweeter, mid-range, and woofer, I still do every one of them myself.
Don't ever retire.
I am training this one person that's doing the tweeters. That's the first step because it's a tedious process and it allows me to kind of think, there's no music playing or anything. I'm thinking, and while I'm doing this, it's kind of therapeutic. But Mama wants to go in the motorhome, more often. And so we are going to train. We are training another person, several other people to do that. Yes.
What system do you keep in your motorhome?
Bose.
Believe it or not, and Brad can attest to this, I never play anything in the car or the motorhome because it distracts my thoughts of working on new projects. My wife wears headphones. She listens to music. But I don't like her music anyway, so...
We know that his son Nathan has plans for the motorhome. He thinks it needs
I did put a little system in the motorhome, but that's for after we're parked. Yes.
So the combination between balsa and carbon
Yes.
is what makes that good that they're different, so that they tend to null.
Balsa happens to be the best dampening material. First of all, its compressive strength is 8 times stronger than any other material, including Roacell, which is commonly used in the airplane I built. I used it to build an airplane. But it's balsa is 8 by weight now, 8 times stronger in compressive strength. GM, for instance, uses it in the floorboard of the Corvette, not because they wanted the strength or the light weight. They wanted to damp the road noise coming up through the floorboard. So it's a very effective damping material. And in our case, when you're building a truss for maximum stiff, like the trusses on your house, you need to have webs in there to get that stiffness. It also does that function. And then carbon again. It's a
The
sandwich.
cone is actually balsa and the carbon is on either side of it.
Correct. The surface. Those of you that know about concrete, because I used to do construction, the strength in your driveway is the finish. If you just throw the concrete on the ground, smooth it out with a 2x4, you drive anything over that, it's going to crack. If you put a nice finish on it, that's where you get the strength. For racers like myself, I owned and drove a super modified for 25 years. Not anymore, I'm too old, but you polish the rods, and the reason for it is to make them stronger. So it's a similar situation. Yeah. Pardon me? It just aligns the grain to where you don't have the stress, the stress focused in places that would cause it to break.
Distributes the stresses.
Correct. Yes.
So in the carbon and the balsa, what you're really doing, I think, is you are enhancing or canceling resonant frequencies with dissimilar materials.
That's constrained layer damping, and no, that is not really what's going on. The balsa itself functions as the webs, and it happens to be a very effective dampening material. What you're talking about is constrained layer damping, where you use 2 surfaces that are actually quite thick, and you put a gooey membrane in between it. That's how we do our woofer boxes. The Trio, the VLR, the Quattro, the Kentos, and the Model 7s all have that, where you have a box within a box with a gooey membrane in between. That's called constrained layer damping. That's not really what's going on in the mid-range, because the carbon layers are very thin and the balsa is quite thick. So that doesn't really give you that. You have to have equal surfaces with a thin membrane in between. But it's not necessary. We're looking for the stiffness in the cones.
And lightness too, probably, right?
Balsa, yes, 3.5 pound density per cubic foot.
So it doesn't have as much momentum to pull and
Right.
back, push and pull back.
It's very hard to get because of all the windmills and everything. There's a big demand for balsa wood, but we use 3.5 pounds per square foot. That's a way of describing the density. Average balsa is 8 to 10 pounds per square foot. Cubic foot. And we have to go through the suppliers I use. I have to go through about 4 or 5 40-foot containers full of balsa wood to get 2 pieces 4 foot long of balsa that weighs that light. And there's a class of people that do indoor rubber band airplanes. It's a real popular thing. They're looking for that really lightweight balsa, and I was not able to get enough of it. So I called 3 of the major suppliers and I said, what are you getting for that 4 foot piece? So we get a couple $100. I'll give you $1,000 for every one you find. And I have no problem getting enough of it.
And we pay for it.
Because the heavier stuff just won't work. Thank God it does make a fair amount of mid-range cones. Well, it looks to me like we're ready to play music. Like I said, if you have questions about your own personal systems or whatever, I'll go upstairs. Yes?
When you actually make the balsa cone, is that taking a flat sheet, molding it, or is that machining it out of a
No,
solid
we machine it with a little milling machine with zero tolerance ball nuts and linear Thompson bearings. I made the machine myself because it needs to be, only an idiot would make something round with a milling machine. That's the job of a lathe. But you can't use a cutter to cut balsa, it peels. So you need to use a ball cutter, a mill, and because you're going in a circular pattern, you have the slop in the drive of the X and Y 4 times where the direction reverses. So I devised a way to make a ball nut that has no tolerance. So when it reverses direction, it stays accurate. And when I complained to the people that made the milling machine, they said, well, you need to use a lathe. That's not what a mill does. And I said, well, I can't use, anyway. So I just made my own machine.
So in other words, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
In other people's eyes.
Yeah. The trick with that whole balsa thing was, when I first tried it, I milled it, I put the skin on it, I put it in the press in the oven for 8 hours, and when it came out, I could take my fingernail and peel all of the strands. It's unifiber, it's very exotic carbon fiber, but it's a bunch of individual strands, and I could peel them off. So I called the pre-preg supplier, and I said, hey, what's going on? He said, well, that's called a dry layup. And I says, what does that mean? He says, well, the matrix that has buckyballs in it, it's a high density, high tensile strength matrix. He says, it's migrating somewhere. What are you putting it on? And I said, balsa wood. And he said, well, if you look at balsa wood under a microscope, it looks like looking into a box of soda straws. Capillary action is taking all of your matrix and pulling it into the balsa and leaving your carbon fiber unsupported. So I said, what do you do about that? He said, well, you call Baltec. So I called Baltec. They make boat bottoms out of that. And he says, yeah, we make a sealer for that. I said, fine, send me some. So they sent me the sealer, and I put it on there, and sure enough, I didn't have the problem. The layup was great. The carbon fiber looked like, but it was so damn heavy it wouldn't play. So it took me 10 years to find a way to bond carbon fiber to balsa wood without having to add a sealer. And that process is not in the patent. I didn't put that in there.
Trade secret?
It's a trade secret. Nobody in the shop, not even Nathan, knows that yet. He will. But anyway, it took 10 years to figure that out. I'm flying.
How's your insurance payments? Are they paid up?
Any more questions? We have 15 employees. Our factory's about 40,000 square foot. We're limited as to how many we can make because every pair has to go through the chamber. And but that's fine. It's that we're able to supply. We don't have that many dealers. We tend to not have them very close to one another, and we're able to meet most of the time the demand we have.
When you say through the chamber, that's your listing tweaking chamber?
No, it's an anechoic chamber where every crossover is dialed in to make sure that it's doing exactly.
It's a measurement space, though.
It's a measurement space.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
What is your reference track that you use to listen to check out all of this?
It's John's favorite track.
Which could be.
Well,
changed
I have
every day.
I have 4 master tapes that I made. Actually, one of them became a record. It's called Only Love with Terry Garrison, of a gal I met on vacation in Hawaii, and she did a boat party for us when
You
we
and
used
your
to.
wife met her, right?
No, that was second time.
Your
Yeah,
story is-
yeah. But so she came out, and we did this recording with David Lindley and a whole bunch of famous people. And I learned that I thought maybe it'd be fun to make a little money, or at least break even, and do some recordings. Wrong. But anyway, I ended up with master tapes where I was actually in the church in Santa Barbara. We had to record from midnight to 5 in the morning to keep the car noise down. And I was there, and I know exactly what it should sound like. But what I use when I'm setting things up and making sure, Diana Krall live in Paris, when they recorded that DVD, somebody had a 2-track machine and they made an analog copy of that, and that became the album. And I use, which cut is that again?
A case of you.
A Case of You. I know that like the back of my hand, and I use that everywhere. Well, not the name, that's just yeah. But anyway, I use that, but mostly for R&D. I only use that when I'm on the road. For R&D, we use the master tapes that I made 25 years ago. And the reason I did that is the marketing people 40 years ago, they said, well, once I decided to do loudspeakers, they were arguing over whether we're going to do East Coast or West Coast sound. And I said, and I went home that night. It was on a Thursday night, drinking beer and stuff. And I said, wow, I've already told my wife I'm going to quit my real job and I'm going to do this for a living. And the damn marketing people can't figure out what this speaker's supposed to sound like. So the next Thursday, I went back and I said, guys, we need to make a speaker that doesn't have a West Coast sound or an East Coast sound. To the best of our ability, let's remove any characteristic sound that it might have. And the first speaker was a disco thing, had a bunch of woofers in it, a bunch of mid-ranges, and a bunch of tweeters. And all the tweeters except one went away, and the mid-ranges except one went away. All the woofers stayed. Next thing you know, there was a pole, and we stuck the drivers on there, and that's how the whole thing started. And Garth, who is part of AudioQuest, that's doing their new power line, was a 15-year-old drummer. And he'd ride his bike and come to almost every one of those sessions. So he is familiar with this whole process that we went through, and it ended up being the Model 2. But beyond that, to take it further, I said, we recorded car keys, Garth on the drums, guitar, piano, voice, pounding cardboard boxes, shaking car keys, scraping concrete with a shovel. And the panel would, with all these different designs, would decide which one sounded the most like the sound we just recorded, because Nevin had an Revox tape machine and some Sony tube mics. And anyway, that whole process, we came up with the original Model 2. And everything we do today is still based on that R&D that we did 46 years ago. So, but once we got that done, I says, how am I going to refine this? Because you never know how an album is made, how the recording was made. And that's why I went ahead and made one where I was actually there, a little more complicated than scraping shovels on a floor or recording a single instrument. And I still use those to today. Yeah. We're done?
So to speak.
John, it's all yours.
All right.